Hey, this is Steve with Dabble Lab, and today I'm joined by Roger Brogan, and we are going to be talking about Bixby, Samsung Bixby, and more specifically, this is going to be a multi-part tutorial, or I don't know if tutorial is the right word, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to be working together to take a few Alexa skills that I built a while back, and we're going to convert those to Bixby Capsules, or the Alexa skills are going to stay, but in addition to the Alexa skills, we're going to build Bixby Capsules that have the same kind of functionality. So we're kind of diving into how we're going to do that. And Roger has started the process. So what have you found so far, Roger?
Yeah, so well, just starting really at the very beginning, right? So we wanted to take Alexa skills. Which Alexa skill are we gonna port over?
I think we're going to do a few of them,
Okay.
but starting with the hurricane tracker, since hurricane season just started, and just for anybody that's watching, hurricane tracker is a simple skill that gets weather data from NOAA and lets users track the location of hurricanes. So I'm in Florida. That is a common thing, especially, well, not so, this is early hurricane season, but later in the season, if there's storms, you're always kind of wanting to be aware of where they are. So hurricane tracker, and then maybe Suggest-A-Beer is another one I'd like to convert, or do a Bixby capsule for. And Suggest-A-Beer is a simple skill that suggests craft beer to try. And there's, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 craft beers, and you can like suggest them based on style and geography and all kinds of stuff like that.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I started looking at some of the hurricane tracker code last night, and actually, I know that we talked about taking that the data gathering part and throwing that in a function to load up a database ahead of time, and then do
Yeah.
that. I started looking at that yesterday.
I found a
Since
couple of other APIs. I was just kind of searching also, and I found like Open Data has the NOAA data also, and an API on top of it. So they're pulling it. I didn't dig into it enough to see if it's exactly what we need, but might be yeah, it might be easier well, we can check it out or just pull it ourselves.
Yeah, that sounds promising. I was taking a look at the code you were using to pull it in with the XML RSS feed, and seems pretty interesting, but it doesn't do a whole lot when there's no storm. So we'll have to wait.
Yeah, yeah,
Better test data.
yeah. And I think
Not
it's
that,
great. I think right now it's only pulling like storm data from the Atlantic
yeah,
also. Like if you expand it on the RSS docs, you can usually find something somewhere. And that might be another thing that we want to add, is just to expand the coverage, so it's not just storms in the Atlantic Ocean.
yeah, it's a good idea. Make it international,
Yeah,
global world that we live in.
that's right. Bixby will be everywhere, no doubt. So
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so let me I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here.
okay,
Find the share button here. I'm gonna share screen two here. So let me know when that
got it.
pops up. Okay, so what we've got here is the Bixby Developer Center after you log in, right? So as soon as you come to the Bixby Developer Center, they're going to give you a little bit of info, and then they're going to ask you to go ahead and log on to the account, and then you're going to go ahead and download Bixby Studio. And then let me share you Bixby Studio here. And it's a pretty nice little developer platform here. And I've actually loaded up some sample code here. But if we go back to where I've caught up to, is going through here, read the overview, read the quick start guide, and then from the quick start guide, they have a simple little capsule here that is just rolling two six-sided dice.
Yeah, that's the one that I went through.
Yeah, so and it kind of breaks down the first thing here, concepts and actions. So it's got primitives, which would be kind of your standard programming primitives like integers and numbers and things like that. And then it's got kind of rolling those together into a structure, which is made up of primitives. So this is very similar to essentially like building a class or something from primitives in object-oriented languages. And then actions, right? This is the action that takes, in this instance, it's taking a couple of inputs, right? And then it's going to produce an output called the role concepts. And action sounds a lot like a method as well. So, and if we take a look, the declaration or the language, the way that it's kind of set up here for declaring these is kind of interesting. It's kind of hierarchical, uh, you know, JSON-esque, I suppose, right? Or more or less kind of looks like just
Yeah.
kind of method declarations there and some optional descriptions. But, then we've got our structure and we can see it's got some sort of a hierarchy and we've got some metadata in here. This is minimum required, right? Maximum one. And then we've got our role here, which is tied to some more typing information. We've got a minimum required, but we can have many of these. And then testing those. So if we open our little simulator, I've got this open. So let me just go ahead and pop this guy open. Session timeout. Okay, well, here's our Bixby simulator. And here's the standard one. And this is I think the number of dice here. So I was playing around with it, set it to 3. But if we just go ahead and run this here, we can see exactly what we've got here. That it's, the goal was we want a roll result concept and the number of dice, 6, or the number of sides concept is 6, number of dice is 2, and then run intent, right? So this is actually, I believe, sent up to the server and it's answering back, here's what I found, here's my rolls, here's the sum. And, we could easily bump it up to say like 3 dice and run that. And we get three rolls here. And then I think if we wanted to bump it up to like, a 12-sided die, as you used to play Dungeons and Dragons, right? We could have, a larger range here. So it's kind of nice and flexible, right?
So if you go back to that documentation a sec, I'm trying to map in my head the terms are just sort of like the primitives. So the primitives are types. Like if this were, so those are.
Yeah, let's look at it in the studio here. So, and they're both called studio, but one was actually a debugger. Here's the actual code. So if we come down here under the models, most of that stuff is under the models. So let's go to the primitives. And this is the first primitive here. That's just the number of dice concept. And then I think this is an actual optional description here. And it's just saying, okay, this is going to be an integer. And then we've got this other thing here called number of sides. This is going to be the number of sides of the dice. And then here's our role model, which is the role concept, which we'll have to figure out what concept is a pretty overloaded term. So we'll have to kind of figure out what that is. And then they've got the sum concept, right? So these are the numbers, right? So we've got a number of sides on the die, number of dice that we're going to roll, the roll, which is going to be, the result of the dice roll, and then the sum, which is going to be totaling all of those up.
So,
right?
so are there, is there some notion of like Bixby native primitives? So like you use the example like integer, like regular, I see, yeah.
Yeah, looks like we've got some stuff here. I just did a control space to do IntelliSense, and we've got decimal enum,
Yeah.
Boolean, qualified text, structure, action, right? So that's what we get at this top level. And if we look at the structures, which this is kind of rolling those together, right? So if I understand this correctly, this is essentially the roll result, right? And then we've got our property here. That's a sum. That was the sum concept, right? So if we go back here and look, so that's, if I understand this, this is going to be the way that these are referred to by name. So this should be our, that becomes a type, right?
Mm-hmm.
This, I believe, is the new name, and then the role is that as well. And this is the role concept, right? Which if we go back to the role is this thing. And if I'm jumping around too much, let me
Yeah.
know. We're just bouncing back between the structures. So we're assembling a higher level data structure here with a couple of properties, and we're defining what these properties are, which now we're getting out of. I mean, this is kind of nice. If, I don't know if you've talked about, you know, primitive obsession in design, right? Where ideally you want to create stronger types as soon as you can for simple things, and then you can, you know, we're now applying some other metadata validation on this just declaratively, right? We're saying that this is required, this is required. I can have a bunch of these. I'm only going to have one of these at max, and that's pretty interesting. And then the action here is our roll dice, and then it's going to collect some input, you know, from our number of dice comment. And once again, we've got a number of dice concept, right? And so, right, the number of dice concept is described there. This is the type. So this is our name underneath our collect part of the action here. And then we've got our other input that's in there. And then we've got our output and the type of calculation. And you might say, okay, well, where does it actually do any of this stuff? Well, there is actually the main entry point into the app here. So what we've got here, right, and we've got our roll dice function, which if I understand here, is going to be identified by our roll dice action here, right? So let's see if that's, oh, looks like it's doing a little maybe camel casing to match that up, perhaps. Same with num dice and num sides, which, there we go, num dice, num sides. Okay. And then our output and type, right? So this is what it's returning here. So it's returning our roll result, which is returning a JSON object here, right? With the sum and the result. And this is actually performing the work, right? We're just randomizing however many dice we have and then adding them up.
Got it. So this is where it, if we're talking about like the conversion, this is where you would make the call to an external API to get the data, I'm assuming, right? You know, so like with code here.
Yeah, as far as I understand this right now, you know, we've got under actions, primitives, and structures, we're setting up this model, right? And this model declarative portion. And then under the code section here is where at some point, you know, this action has to be mapped over to what we want it to actually do programmatically.
Got it. Yeah. So that's a little bit different than the other platforms, right? Because there really isn't, like, if you think about Alexa, without making an external call to a service someplace, you're really not going to have any logic like that. That's part of. I mean, there's some logic in the interaction model, but that's kind of Alexa defined logic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I kind of like this.
Yeah,
and
this
notice,
is cool.
Notice what is absent from this that would be in like one of the others. Usually in the bot framework, and I think in Alexa as well, you send some natural language off to a language model, and then it gives you an intent,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to map the intent to your code that you want executed with like a case statement or an if or something like that, right? Here we're kind of doing that ahead of time, right? Like we're tying this code to this. These structures. I believe these models here is, you know, when it's going to figure out that what we want to do is roll the dice, then it's automatically mapped to the main entry point.
Got it. Yeah. So it's like another layer, I guess, that, yeah, I like because it gives you a little bit more control.
Yeah.
So then would actions be analogous to intents, I suppose? right?
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. I think they're using that as kind of the terminology for that. But um,
So as we dive into the hurricane tracker, the track storm intent would be an action, and then within you would map that within the JavaScript there to the in the code, and then within that code you would call what we were talking about, which is basically like setting up a generic API endpoint that would be the data for the storm data, and then all of the logic that we use on the storm data would be done in code.
well, yeah, but look, it's maybe a little bit more interesting than that, though. I mean, look at our tests. So the test data that we shot into this is labeled as an intent here. So they do have the concept of intent, right? And they have the goal that they want a role result concept, and then they're
Mhm.
feeding data in there. And then
Yeah,
so it is figuring out that this is the goal that we want, and these are the inputs, and then this is what it's giving us out. So it is kind of figuring out, I guess, backing up that this is the goal. We've just really
mm-hmm.
just stated the goal. So it's figuring out that it needs to hop back over there and execute the action to get this and go execute the JavaScript and then give us the results.
Got it. So like right now, with Hurricane Tracker, the everything is done on the server endpoint, on the skill service.
Right.
So here, if we that's not going to be how it works, I don't think, right? So we're going to do a lot of the logic here in the code, or in yeah. So
Well,
for example, like checking your location, do you do that on the server by passing in geo coordinates, or do you just do that, you know, through Bixby? Like, do you not on the server, but it's all on the server. But do you do that uh, via your own API endpoint, or is that going to be just something that is baked in here?
yeah, they've got a little debug concept here where it's showing that, the number of dice concept here, we had one of those that came up 3, the number of side concepts. So this is like our input for number of dice, input for the number of sides. Our output goal
Uh-huh.
was the roll result, right? So it figured out that we needed to perform this calculation um, in here. So it did map over, just kind of poking around in this. So it's rolling over to,
I like
yeah,
this.
this is pretty cool. So this is kind of what it did. This is the execution tree of, this is what we said. Okay, give me 12 sided die, give me 3 of them, and I want this roll result concept. And
Yeah,
this
that's
is
super
this is
cool.
figured out. It says,
Yeah.
okay, to get here, you gave me this and this. To get to here, I need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the part that's really actually clever, right? Because this is the part that is, unless you're clever in the way that you structure your code and you use, polymorphism to do your dispatching and things like that. This is the one that almost always starts pretty clunky, where you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to match the code to the intents, right? What are you
Mm-hmm.
trying to do? And if we just kind of start with an intent map to a goal, and and granted, we have some metadata in here so that it understands how to do this, but if it can kind of build its own little execution graph based on the way that we structure it, I really like this. This is pretty exciting to really dig in and see how this is going to be, because so maybe for the storm tracker, what we'll end up doing is having uh, you know storm position result concept or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
right?
I really want to do that, and that was on the roadmap for the Alexa skill. But the Alexa devices currently don't have a whole lot in terms of location data. So you could use like the user settings, and for those users that have set their address, like physical street address, which you can do within the Alexa uh, uh, companion app. Um, you can use that to kind of position, get using the address, find out what the geo coordinates are. But I haven't done that just because it was kind of kind of a lift. And the other reason I didn't do that is because you need to, the onboarding friction is pretty steep. So if somebody enables the skill, then they also need to use the companion app to allow the skill to get access to the address information. And so I left it out just because that felt like too much friction. I
Yeah.
guess could just like prompt the user for their postal address or postal code, like zip code, and then use the geo coordinates from that, and that would probably be fine.
Yeah.
I'm betting that with Bixby, and I think somebody told me that you can get geo coordinates from the device because it's a mobile device, right? So I'm betting that we could do that right in the capsule.
Yeah. I mean, here's the kind of the standard devices that it emulates already, right? You got your Galaxies,
Yeah.
Lines, Notes, Table One Portrait. I mean, these are just for the simulators, I think here. But yeah, this is pretty slick. I mean, this will, if it works, the way I think it does, this will make the code a lot more elegant, really, and probably a lot more flexible. So, the only other, pro or I guess more of a con to go along with the pros of declarative development. A lot of times, declarative development is more difficult to debug. You can't usually
Yeah.
developers don't support setting a breakpoint inside of a configuration, right? It's just you get the configuration correct or not, right? But we'll see.
So on that, like, but it's not all declarative, right? You still have JavaScript code in there.
Right.
Um, and so with that JavaScript code, I'm assuming you would use like the normal tools for test, like Mocha and Chai for unit testing and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. For unit testing, not quite sure about
Like
the actual
functional
debugger support
testing.
yet, but there's got to be some way to do it. And like
Yeah.
I said, I just fired this up this morning, so
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I
So,
yeah, I mean, I actually had the Device Studio downloaded and I read through the documentation before, but um, logging in was I don't know, it
yeah,
was
that was the hardest part, logging in.
that was the hardest part, all right, because
Well,
the screen I was on, the captcha was like really, really, and plus I probably need glasses at this point. The
I could
captcha,
tell you weren't happy with the CAPTCHA experience. But if that's I guess if that's the major friction point, that's probably a good thing.
yeah,
Starting out with a development environment, and the hardest part is the login.
this
That's
is true.
encouraging.
This is true. And follow along my my ideas of never throwing a complaint out unless I have a potential solution. Just since we're
I
dealing
think
with
I think
devices
you
here.
did have a solution, right? Take the CAPTCHA off.
Yeah. Well, that's the simple one. But if they want to keep like more security, do the Outlook or the Azure portal, where you just have your account protected with the authenticator device. And maybe that's more friction to set up, but I've got it
Yeah,
set up for all my accounts now. And it's just so much nicer to log in
yeah.
without a password or CAPTCHA and just confirm the login on your phone, and then boom, you're right in. So
I,
that
I
would be,
I wonder, like, once do you have to log in every time you start the IDE? I haven't used it enough to know.
yeah, so far it looks like it. And, even though I was logged in another browser, different from my default browser. When I clicked sign in, it launched my default browser, so I had to log in yet again. So, and there was some weird um, first few times I did it, it didn't actually redirect back to the app correctly or something. It was something in relaunching the portal or whatever, but I don't know. It just started working. So
Yeah.
not that big of a deal, but
Yeah, that OAuth dance though between desktop apps and web, because of the need to open the browser, that's always kind of clunky.
yeah, definitely a little bit clunky. It's gotten a lot better with OpenID Connect, but yeah, I think that's I think that's probably all we want to cover today. Maybe I mean the next section we could go through. There's obviously more in the quick start guide. So there's views and dialogues and defaults and input validation and training and stuff like that. So there's definitely some more stuff. I don't know if you wanted to keep these to
Yeah, I
like
mean, I
30
think
minutes
for starters, maybe like the primary goal is just getting getting the one of the skills. I don't want to keep using the word converted because the skill is going to stay the Alexa skill, but just creating a capsule version of the
yeah,
skill.
just
Maybe
port
we
it.
sort of pound through one of them without a whole lot of thought on, are we doing it the right way? And then maybe we can go back and refactor it after we stumble through.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, that way we can just sort of learn without getting wrapped around the axle and just see what we see.
Yeah,
What do you think?
yeah, sounds like a plan. Sounds like a plan. Yeah, if I can get we'll get some, expand the scope of storm data so we can get some more data to play with and or actually look at those other APIs. They would be a little bit better than the XML RSS.
Yeah,
Um,
it's literally just scraping the NOAA site now, right? If you like, did you spend any time looking, or you said you did, but
I
um,
did. It took
yeah, the way that I'm doing it is just using like Cheerio, which is a kind of a headless DOM parser, and I'm just scraping or grabbing the RSS feed in it. And there's probably a better way to do that. There's probably some RSS to JSON converter module that probably could have worked. I can't remember why I decided to do that. It was so long ago.
yeah. Here's the
Yeah,
code right here. Yeah,
yeah,
just
yeah,
the URL and just you know RSS channel Cheerio load,
yeah.
and then
I mean, yeah.
you're just parsing it out. Yeah, right there.
I wonder, like, if we just almost literally copied and like if we just copy and pasted this into the code section just for starters without even refactoring the backend, I wonder if we could get it working.
I'm sure because I just copied and pasted this into. This is actually an Azure function app
Oh,
that,
okay.
and yeah, it works. I just popped it in. So I mean, it just says
Yeah,
there's
just look
no
at
there's no
that.
storms for that area, but it all works, right?
Yeah, just looking at that reminds me of that whole process creating it.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. But yeah,
um,
so let's just port as much of the hurricane tracker over to Bixby and get it. We might have to. I might have to make up some storm data since there's no storms. And that would be really uninteresting to just constantly return that there's no storms. But I think we could work through that. I can definitely mock up a backend that has some data in it.
I think you can change the date too in there, if I recall, like to get historic data because it's out there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that we can do that too.
There's someplace in there because I think I was running into the same. Actually, no, it was after I did it. Like I built it during Hurricane Irma
Yeah,
actually, so there was an active storm.
yeah, yeah.
But
So yeah, I think most of it, since it's really JavaScript and JavaScript, the code wise is going to be a lot of just copy and paste, and then the other is just kind of hooking it up to the models and figuring out what the metadata for the stuff should be. And I don't think that will be too tough once I finish up the rest of this little developer docs. Like you said before, the developer documentation is really pretty
Really good.
good. So yeah, it looks pretty
Yeah.
straightforward.
All right, cool. Well, then I think we'll call it a day for this session, and yeah, we'll regroup next week and see see what we see.
All right. Sounds good, Steve.
Awesome. Thanks, Roger. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.